Picture a stage packed with singers, a live band tucked off to the side, and thousands of people on their feet before a single note has even been sung. That was a typical night for the Gaither Vocal Band in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and right at the center of it, sharing microphones and trading vocal lines that seemed to defy what the human voice should be able to do, stood two men who, on paper, shouldn't have worked quite this well together. One had a rich, grounded, almost country-tinged voice that could carry a room on its own. The other had a range so wide it made seasoned musicians shake their heads in disbelief. Penrod and David Phelps. For roughly 8 years, these two were the beating heart of one of the most influential groups in Southern gospel music. This is the story of how they got there, what it actually took to sing together night after night for the better part of a decade, and why, when it finally ended, it ended the way it did. To understand what Guy Penrod brought to the Gaither Vocal Band, you have to go back to Texas and then New Mexico, where he grew up as a pastor's son. Church wasn't just something the family attended on Sundays. It shaped the sound Guy would carry for the rest of his life. He studied music and vocal performance at Liberty University in Virginia, and it was there, on his graduation night, that he married his college sweetheart, Angie, from Virginia. The couple moved to Atlanta, where Guy taught music at a Christian school. But it didn't take long before Nashville came calling. Once he arrived in Music City, Penrod built a career most singers only dream about, not as a headline act, but as one of the most in-demand session vocalists in town. He sang backup for country stars, for contemporary Christian artists, for pop and gospel crossover projects alike. He became a familiar face on the weekly television program Music City Tonight, and along the way he crossed paths with a songwriter and producer who would change the course of his career, Bill Gaither. By the mid-1990s, Penrod had joined the Gaither Vocal Band as its lead singer. It was a role that demanded presence as much as vocal power. The lead singer in this kind of group isn't just hitting notes, he's anchoring the whole sound, giving the group its emotional center. Penrod did that for the better part of 14 years. While Penrod was building his reputation in Nashville studios, a young man named David Phelps was training in a very different environment. Born in Tomball, Texas, Phelps grew up in a household that valued music and education in equal measure. His father taught business and finance. His mother was an English professor. He went on to study at Baylor University, where he directed the university's religious hour choir and trained his voice under a respected vocal coach. He graduated in 1992 with a degree in music and vocal performance. What set Phelps apart wasn't just training, though. It was the instrument itself. His voice could move across roughly 3 octaves, gliding from a warm lower register up into a soaring, almost operatic tenor that very few singers in gospel music or arguably any genre could touch. It was the kind of voice that made audiences go quiet mid-song, unsure whether to keep listening or start applauding. Phelps joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 1997, stepping into the tenor role. And that's the moment two very different voices, one earthy and powerful, the other soaring and technical, ended up sharing the same stage. It's worth pausing on why this pairing worked so well. Penrod's lead vocal gave songs their weight, the kind of voice that sounded like it had lived through what it was singing about. Phelps, meanwhile, brought the moments that made jaws drop, the key change that suddenly lifted 3 octaves, the sustained note that seemed to hang in the air far longer than it should. Put those 2 elements next to Bill Gaither's arrangements and gospel songwriting, and you had a formula that filled arenas. This was also the era of the Gaither Homecoming video series, which had already become a cultural phenomenon within gospel and Christian music circles. These weren't small, local recordings. They were massive taping sessions, often filmed in front of live audiences, that were then packaged and sold as videos and DVDs to millions of households. Penrod and Phelps became two of the most recognizable faces in that entire universe. Beyond the videos, there were the tours. And if you've never worked in live music, it's easy to underestimate what a touring schedule like this actually costs a person. We're not talking about the occasional weekend show. We're talking about a punishing, near-constant rhythm of travel, bus rides through the night, sound checks in unfamiliar arenas, 2, sometimes 3 performances in a single day during peak touring seasons, and barely any time at home in between. Guy Penrod was raising a family throughout all of this. He and Angie would go on to have 8 children together. David Phelps had his own life to balance alongside the demands of the road. Singing at a professional level night after night in wildly different rooms with wildly different acoustics takes a physical toll most audiences never see. Vocal rest becomes precious. Sleep becomes a luxury. And the emotional cost of being away from family for weeks at a stretch is something artists in this world rarely talk about publicly, but almost universally describe as one of the hardest parts of the job. And yet, through all of that, the group kept producing hit records, kept selling out venues, and kept building a catalog of songs that are still staples of gospel radio today. Nothing in the music industry stays fixed forever, and in 2005, the first major change to this era arrived. David Phelps left the Gaither Vocal Band to focus more fully on his solo career, a path he had actually already been building alongside his group work. His departure meant the end of that specific 8-year pairing with Penrod. Wes Hampton, a longtime fan of the group who had been following their music for years, stepped into the tenor role. Penrod, meanwhile, continued on as lead singer, and the Gaither Vocal Band kept moving forward, releasing further acclaimed records over the next few years, including a project that would go on to win the group a Grammy Award. If 2005 was the first shift, 2008 and 2009 were the earthquake. In the autumn of 2008, Guy Penrod announced he was taking a leave of absence from the Gaither Vocal Band. Several familiar faces filled in for him during that stretch, including, notably, David Phelps himself, returning briefly to cover dates. Then, in January of 2009, Bill Gaither made it official. Guy Penrod, along with baritone Marshall Hall, was leaving the group entirely, after roughly 14 years at its center. What followed was one of the most talked about lineup changes in the genre's history. Rather than simply replacing 2 singers, Gaither restructured the entire group. He brought back 3 previous members all at once, David Phelps returning to the tenor role, Michael English stepping back in as lead vocalist, and Mark Lowry rejoining as well, alongside Wes Hampton and Bill Gaither himself. Overnight, the Gaither Vocal Band went from a quartet to a quintet. For longtime fans, it was a jolt. The lineup that had defined nearly a decade of homecoming videos and arena tours had officially closed that chapter. But it also opened up something else entirely. 2 hugely successful solo careers that were, in many ways, already underway. Guy Penrod didn't waste time. The same year he departed, he released his debut solo album, Breathe Deep, produced with a distinctly country gospel flavor that reflected the traditional hymns he'd grown up on. He followed that with further solo projects over the years, records built around hymns, worship music, and a Christmas collection, while continuing to tour extensively as an independent artist, still drawing crowds who remembered him from his Gaither years, but now experiencing him on his own terms. David Phelps, for his part, had already been carving out a solo identity even during his time with the group, and he leaned further into it after 2005 and again after his second stint with the vocal band, which ran from 2009 through 2017. His solo work leaned into his signature strength, that extraordinary vocal range, through Christmas albums, concert specials, and performances that showcased exactly the kind of technical and emotional range that had made him such a standout tenor in the first place. Both men, in other words, took the reputations they'd built together and turned them into independent legacies. Neither needed the Gaither Vocal Band name to keep filling venues. That, in itself, tells you something about how significant those years actually were, not just for the group, but for each of them individually. It's easy, looking back, to talk about the Penrod and David Phelps era of the Gaither Vocal Band purely in terms of chart positions, Grammy wins, or sold-out arenas, and those things certainly happened. But underneath the accolades was something harder to quantify: two singers with genuinely different gifts, sharing a stage night after night for years on end, under the kind of relentless touring schedule that tests anyone's endurance. What they built together between 1997 and 2005 still echoes through gospel music today, and the songs still played on the radio, and the video footage still watched by new generations of fans, and in the solo careers that carried their voices forward long after they stopped sharing that particular stage. Two very different voices. One unforgettable era,